we want to welcome you to the ALMA podcast, archiving Latino memories and achievements, a podcast where we highlight local leaders and their stories.
Hola, Familia. Today, we have a very special guest amongst us. My name is Eddie Garcia, part of the ALMA podcast. We have Jose Zavala with us, and our guest today is Maria Arevelo. Maria Arevelo currently serves as chair of the Stanislaus Community Latino Giving Circle. She has been a member of several community organizations, including the Merced Rotary Club, the Stanislaus Mental Health Board, and the Six Cups to College program. From 2005 until her retirement in 2014, Maria served as the Deputy County Counsel for Merced County. She has also worked for the Office of the Public Defender in Stanislaus and Merced counties, and had a solo private practice for several years. She's a UC Berkeley graduate and has a law degree from Berkeley Law. Also, to add to that, Maria and I currently teach a citizenship class at El Concilio here locally in Modesto. That is on Tuesdays from 5:30 to 7 every week. Prior to that, I met Maria at the Latino Leadership Initiative, where a couple of us went through the program. I've always admired Maria's very firm and, in a sense, strict teaching. It's taught me a lot. It's taught me a lot of values. It's taught me how to lead as a professional. We also have been involved in many other nonprofit initiatives, but more recently with El Concilio. Thank you, Maria, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to ask her a couple questions, have a couple conversations here, and I'll open up the floor for Jose to ask a couple of those.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and how are you doing today?
I'm good today. Had a good day. A little bit about myself. I came, like Eddie said, to Modesto for my first legal job with California Rural Legal Assistance. I came from Berkeley to Modesto back in 1978, and it was like moving back in time culturally and many other ways. It was so different. Berkeley and Modesto were really, it was culture shock. But I had a great job with CRLA, really enjoyed working with farm workers, working on a lot of pesticide regulation issues. And then I moved on from there to criminal defense. I did criminal defense for a lot of years, many years. It was really gratifying because I really felt like I made an impact for individuals. People who get caught up in the criminal justice system, the odds are stacked against our people. The brown and black people in that system really have a lot of issues. And if you don't have a lot of money in that system, it's really difficult. So I really felt that as a public defender, or when I was a public defender and also did criminal defense and a private practice, that had I not been there, people would have suffered a lot more serious consequences. And so I felt that time was really challenging, really interesting, and really very rewarding to be in that practice. And then I did lots of other things as a lawyer. I think I'm one of the few lawyers that really enjoyed being a lawyer the whole time. I had lots of different careers in law. And the last one was being the executive director of a public pension system where we administered a pension system for the employees of Merced County. So that was also very gratifying.
Was that something you always wanted to do, or is this
in law?
Yeah, in law.
I think when I was growing up, my parents came from Mexico. I was born in Mexico. I immigrated here when I was about 3 years old. And as part of a Mexican family, the girls in that family were not treated the same way as the boys. We had 3 boys and 3 girls. And I grew up, you know how they say, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? I was never asked that. I was told, you're going to be a mom, you're going to be a wife, you're going to be, and I always just chafed at that. I just thought that wasn't fair. It wasn't fair that I was a girl and I was treated so differently from my brothers. And then when I went out into the world and I realized that I was a Mexican, the discrimination and the racism that I experienced back then, I also felt that wasn't fair. So I think early on, I had this sense of fairness. Life should be fair. And I think that sort of drew me to the law. I thought that the law could be a real tool to make things more fair for people.
To put it out there, before we started this interview, Maria said she doesn't really like to talk about herself, but although we have been good co-workers and friends in a way for a while, I did not know about this, and it makes sense. I really admire the way that Maria carries herself. I was just telling one of my friend Jason, who's here in the studio today on the way up here, I said, one of the stories that I have from Maria that really changed basically my whole life in a very embarrassing way was that one time I was talking to her and I said, oh, girls, referring to someone as an older person who was a female. And she said, oh, are they a child? Are they 4 years old or something? I was like, oh, yeah, no, it's a woman. It's a lady. So little things like that really make sense when you're hearing a story like this. So
Yeah, you being a public defender too. Also, you're being in people's the worst time of their life sometimes, and you really truly have an impact.
So something I'm really curious about is you mentioned the culture shock. Going from Berkeley to the Central Valley, other than the actual culture, what is it something that you might miss from Berkeley or that you learned in Berkeley that you brought to the Central Valley?
Oh, I think that just little things. I remember working in the public defender's office one day, and we had an office where the investigators sat, and the investigator had 3 Playboy bunny posters on his wall. This was in a
wow.
public office, and I walked in there and I went like, "Are you kidding me? This is in Modesto, and you would never see something like that in Berkeley."
Yeah.
And so we would have our office meetings in that room, and I told my director, "I'm not meeting in that room unless those posters come down." And so there was a big hassle in the house, but they did come down. So just little things like that. And also, this area was very Republican. And during elections and during those times, you could tell people were voting Republican versus in Berkeley, that's just not what the experience you had. And just a lot of the way women were treated here. I was the only woman in the public defender's office. My first public defender's office job was in Merced County. Out of the 10 district attorneys and 8 public defenders, I was the only woman. First woman hired, first Latina hired. And when I walked into the courtroom the very first time, the judge said, "Oh, can you speak Spanish? Why don't you go translate for that person?" I'm thinking like, no, you know what? I'm the attorney. I'm not the translator. But that was okay because I was to be of service to the people I was. So I went and translated. But just that kind of attitude that I just, had not experienced in Berkeley was very rampant here in Modesto and in Stanislaus County back then. That was a while back. Things have gotten much better, obviously.
I can definitely relate to having the act of service. And when it comes to translating, I think that at least for me, it's very rooted to help the people that need the help, especially if I can help. But then you also want to make sure that the professionalism and what you're there for actually is of service. What were some small moments, maybe some small decisions that led you to the big moments in your career?
I think it's just the experiences I had as a child and as a young person in the workforce. The experience that I had then just really strengthened my desire to really work to make the community better for people. Being Mexican, the racism was really pretty obvious back when I was growing up, and experiencing that just made me feel stronger about we have got to do something about this problem. For me, a big influence in my life was the women's movement. Gloria Steinem is one of my idols. The Chicano movement was also a big influence in my life. I went from being insecure about being a girl and being not proud of being Mexican to being a very, very proud of my culture, very proud of being a woman, and really fighting in the Chicano movement in Berkeley and here and for women's rights, because there was just so many issues in that community. So those 2 movements back then really had a big influence on how I went forward in my life and how I acted.
It's a common theme I've heard for myself. I was raised by my mom, raised by my grandma, raised by the women in my family, and they experienced that. And some of the best leaders in our community had so much harsh upbringings, and they had to deal with things that really truly shaped their experiences and who they are now.
Yeah. You say that you maybe didn't experience it in the same way that we did. I'm in my 70s now, so it was a while back. But the systemic racism that's built into our systems are still there. They're still strong. They still affect the poverty rates that we have in our communities, the education rates that we have in our communities, the lack of equity that we have in so many areas. And that's not, maybe they're not calling you a dirty Mexican or telling you not to speak Spanish, but those racist systems are still very much embedded in the systems that we have now and impact all of us and the kids that are growing up now. Unfortunately, we have not gotten rid of that. So it may not be as overt, but it is as powerful as ever.
That's an excellent point. When going through the Latino Leadership Initiative, we were tasked to do a project towards the end to pretty much showcase everything we've learned and something we felt passionate about when it came to community engagement. And at the time, I was doing government work, and the biggest gap that I saw was the barrier of language. I think here in the Central Valley, if I'm not mistaken, it's almost over 50% of Latinos. And for language to be a barrier, given that statistic, was just mind-blowing to me. So in my project, we tried to build something to where translation was more accessible, more affordable, And the more important part was that it was more culturally appropriate. Sometimes I feel like when we translate stuff in Google Translate, it's not very welcoming. It's not very, again, culturally appropriate. Sometimes somebody that's reading that with education levels that maybe are a couple in the grade levels don't seem intimidated by just reading all these big words. So there is a way to make it more welcoming. And that was what I saw was the biggest barrier. But it is, like Maria mentions, is it is still the systematic racism is still very alive. And I also do feel very passionate about our community and what we leave behind, which also makes me want to ask the question, what initiatives are you currently working on that excite you or maybe make you think that it's going to shape our community and leave something behind here?
I'm glad you talked about language, because I think as Latino leaders or Latinos involved in trying to change things for our community, having our language strong and having us use it. I remember when I was coming up in the world, you didn't speak Spanish. It was like a hindrance. It wasn't something that you put out there. But I really am really glad to see how the younger generation really puts that out there. They speak Spanish, and they're proud of that they have that ability, and we recognize it now for the asset that it is, being bilingual. When so many people don't have that kind of asset, it's so important, and I think that's how we as Latino leaders lead is with our language, because our language in so many ways can express ideas and feelings that the English language just can't really express. And when you speak Spanish to community, that's right away you can connect. And so even though Spanish was my first language, the language you have to practice to keep it going. That's one thing I love about our citizenship class that we teach, because we're speaking Spanish every Tuesday. We're talking to people who talk to us in Spanish, and it's just really a really neat thing. I know people of my age whose parents discouraged them from keeping their Spanish because they felt that they would be able to integrate into society better if they didn't speak it. But you know what? We are never going to, with our brown bodies, we're never going to assimilate. So we might as well give up on that. And there's no need for that, because we are now, I think, influencing American culture with our language, with our food, with our music, with our art. And so it's just really nice to see how we're embracing the Latino culture way more so on a bigger level, and that brings me happiness. Some of the initiatives that I'm involved right now are, as you mentioned, I'm part of the board of the Stanislaus Community Foundation. That board sponsors a committee called the Adelante Committee, which is a group of residents that give out money to nonprofits. So there's 9 residents, and a couple of them are undocumented. Everybody speaks Spanish, and we get together. This is our second year now. We get together and we look at nonprofits, and then we decide to give them money. So that's been a very neat thing to do. I'm also part of the Latino Giving Circle, as you said. This is our 8th year as the Latino Giving Circle in this county. And in that time, we've probably raised over $120,000 to give out to small nonprofits. And our circle is just Latinas and Latinos. We each put in our own money each year. And at the end of the year, we decide which nonprofits we're going to fund. So that's also really a gratifying thing to be involved in. Yeah, and then I'm also part of the Latino, as Eddie said, I met Eddie through the Latino Leadership Initiative. I'm not part of the leadership team anymore, but I still do my session on government service. So that's also nice to be able to contribute to that program, which I think is really producing some young leaders in our community.
Yeah, no, I thank the LLI for short for a lot of things. I think one thing that I learned the most was just embracing, like Maria said, my culture, embracing my language, extremely important. I always feel like I'm fully myself when I speak Spanish. And given that's the language that I speak to my parents, I was grateful enough to go to a bilingual school here in Modesto, Bret Hart, and that has always stuck with me. But going through LLI really made me appreciate that and see it, like Maria said, like an asset, a very valuable asset, especially here in the community that is made up by mostly Latinos, and seeing how far that could go and making me feel like that made me think how many more people would feel like that. So that's why the whole language barrier thing is very fun to me. Like Maria mentioned in our citizenship classes, we have a lot of people who are learning English for the first time, and a lot of people who have day jobs and sometimes night jobs and families, and they're giving it their all, and seeing that is very inspiring, and being able to connect to people like that because of language is very inspiring. So yeah, I do agree that I'm very happy to see our generation nowadays really embrace that, really embrace music, really embrace the food, really embrace language. It makes me very proud to be Mexican.
This is a KCB community radio production. This is the ALMA podcast, archiving Latino memories and achievements. I would also like to hear some stories, like, for example, were there any key experiences in your childhood or youth that shaped you who you are today?
I think I mentioned it earlier, the racism and being treated as less than because I was a girl. Those experiences really influenced a lot how I moved throughout my life. I went to an all-girls Catholic school in high school. And I remember I grew up in a very traditional Mexican Catholic family. A lot of guilt associated with your behavior. You're going to go to hell unless you do blah, blah, blah. And then I ended up going to this girls' Catholic school, which was really great because we were all women, young women, girls there. So we weren't competing for the attention of guys. And I think that really influenced the high academic standards that happened at that school. So that was a big deal for me. I grew up in the east side of San Jose. The public school that I would have gone to in high school was a very poor performing school. And I don't think I would have gotten into Berkeley had I gone there. I may have, but going to this Catholic girls' school really helped me in terms of education. So that was a big deal. But the other thing I learned at that school was about the Catholic Church. It just seemed I think I began to have my eyes opened about the Catholic Church. And I know a lot of our people hold the church to be very dear to them, and it means a lot to them. But one of the contradictions, for example, we had a priest teaching a class on marriage. And I remember asking the priest one day, I said, how can you as a priest be teaching a class on marriage? That doesn't make sense to me. And he said, it was like a drug. You don't have to use drugs to know that drugs are bad. And I thought, okay, that doesn't make sense in a way. The Catholic Church, when I was in that Catholic high school, I just began to see a lot of the contradictions. And I think it really reinforced my beliefs that women are equal to men. And why aren't women priests? And why? So I know all these issues could be controversial for a lot of people who really respect the Catholic Church. And I'm glad to see a pope now that's a lot more progressive than we've had in the past. But I think the experience of being at that Catholic girls' high school really influenced my curiosity about issues, began my questioning about traditions and standards that were just accepted that I saw the hypocrisy and the contradictions. I think that's when I really began to question a lot of things that I had grown up with and believed in. And it was a very valuable experience.
On the subject of your time practicing law, I'm very curious to know what are some of the most memorable cases or memorable things you saw when you're practicing law, maybe some of the tougher ones or interesting ones.
Yeah, there was a lot. One of the things being a public defender, I know a lot of my friends say, how can you defend that person? They're obviously guilty. How can you do that morally? And I would just say to them, if you're going to put somebody in jail, you better make sure that you've dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's, and that the prosecutor has the evidence that they need to have to convict a person. So my job was basically to make sure that the prosecutor did his job or her job to make sure that if you're going to put my client in prison, then you better do it the right way. And I was there to make sure that process happened. So I never had any problems defending guilty people that I knew were guilty because I believed in the system, even though the system was really stacked against defendants. I had a lot of really interesting cases. And as I look back on it now, it's hard to believe that I had people's lives in my hands, people going to prison for life. And I can't believe I did it because I'm thinking about how stressful it was back then. But it's just for me, I was always really prepared. And I think as a woman, like young Latina walking into the courtroom, I think I was underestimated. And people just didn't take me seriously until they began to know that I was always very prepared. I always knew my cases. I always knew the prosecutor's cases. And so I did well being a criminal defense lawyer. I had some murder cases that were pretty crazy, and I got some acquittals. I had some people confess to crimes, and I was able to toss out confessions because clearly the police didn't follow procedures and they didn't do Miranda rights. A lot of those rights we no longer have. But back then, it was just really gratifying to be able to hold them to the standards that they were supposed to meet.
From your experiences being in law, and do you have any advice to young people, to young Latinas, the Latino community, on just how to be more resilient in those situations that you're in?
Yeah, I think as a criminal defense lawyer, you have a lot more losses than wins. And I think that really contributed to building my resiliency. I think your failures are what's going to build your resilience. If you can look at your failures and be curious about why that happened and ask why things happen and gather data from your failures. I think that's so valuable. And if you don't have failures, and if you're not allowed to fail, and if you're not allowed to get yourself back on your feet on your own, then you're not going to be resilient. And sometimes I see people that parents sometimes want to cushion their kids, and I'm guilty of this myself. I want to cushion my kids from bad experiences or failures, but you got to have those failures to build resilience. Because if you can't handle a bad time, then you're not gonna be successful in life. And every failure to me is a source of data. It's a source of being curious about what happened. It's a source of trying to look forward, see how you're going to do things different. And failures are almost as important as successes.
So I want to mention, we mentioned earlier about the citizenship classes. They are ongoing. We're going to begin them again the second week of July. And we have you could call El Concilio, which is located here in Modesto. The phone number is 209-523-2860. You can get signed up there. Or if you ever have time between 5:30 and 7 on Tuesdays, you can always stop by. We're welcoming. Again, we understand people have lives. I'm late myself sometimes for work. And we go over all the questions. A lot of things are changing with the current administration, so we try to keep up on that. Everyone has questions all the time. Again, Maria's retired now, so she's not offering legal advice in that sense, but we try to give it our best. Whatever public information is out there, we try to stay as up to date as we can. And again, it's at El Concilio on Tuesdays from 5:30 to 7. You can call a phone number at 209-523-2860. Just wanted to plug that in there, make sure that it's very clear to people.
Yeah. Another thing that's great about that class is that you're teaching all these Latinos, Mexicans, and you really have a sense of a shared culture with them. You have a sense of a shared vision. They want something better for themselves and their families. They want to be citizens so they can really participate in our country, in our democracy. And so we share that vision about that. And you can really tell how, I think in Latinos, family is so important. And for them, this effort, like it's just a big effort for them to get to that class. It's all about improving their lives and improving the lives of their children and their family. And I think as Latinos, we hold that to be a real important value, our families, and making things better for people. And I know you're talking about, maybe we're touched about leadership, but leadership to me is not about personal success or credit. It's about contributing to change communities for the better. It's about this group endeavor. And I think for Latinos, I think we do that better as community. We're not like singular leaders. I think that Latinos usually lead with their heart and in communities and with people. And I think that makes us a little different from the standard type of leadership that you see in here.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. I stand by that 100%. I like to say, my successes aren't done by myself, and they're also not just for myself. I don't think I fit the standard, like Maria said, the textbook leadership of a one person does it all. I know that my community is the one that got me where I'm at, and leading with heart is something that I learned in a Latino household. In my family, that's by far the most important thing. The biggest lessons I've learned are from just random stories that they might not even know that holds that much thought. In the citizenship classes, we have a lot of people who have families, when they talk about how important it is for their families to see them get this citizenship. We have people that have been there for a year or almost a year and a half studying, and they want to vote so bad to leave or at least contribute for a better future for their family. So I think the sense of community is very important in the Latino community, and one of the biggest assets I've been very proud of to be a part of. I don't know what my personality, who I would be without that heart of a Latino community. So that's an excellent point. I'm very grateful for that.
What do you think about the current justice system, how it's set up now versus what you were practicing before?
The legal system right now, you look at the Supreme Court, for example, it's a travesty what's happened to the Supreme Court. They're overturning cases without legal precedent. It's basically has been very politicized. So that's very discouraging to see. Judges now at the federal court level making decisions that are not based at all on precedent or law, but more on political whims. And so the justice system has really changed a lot, and it isn't for the better. And I think that a lot of judges that have now been appointed to the bench have been appointed there not because they are committed to the Constitution or the law, but because they've got political aspirations. So in that sense, it's very discouraging. But I think we're beginning to see a little bit of pushback against that right now. And so let's hope that continues to happen.
Politics and the justice system, they are two separate entities, but they are strong.
Should be, right?
They should be, but they're very intertwined in a sense.
Especially right now under this administration that we are. I mean, I just think that we as Latinos, we are still statistics, that we still have statistics that are not good, education-wise, economic-wise, housing, ownership, all that kind of things. And so I just think we have to just keep plugging away and have a sense of community, have a shared vision. Let's try to get some people that have our interest in mind into elected office, locally especially. And in that here in Stanislaus County, in our communities, there's lots of Latinos, nonprofits doing really good stuff, doing really good work, working really hard to try and change things for our people. And I just hope that we can continue to share a vision and work together and make things better for our community, because there's a lot of work to do.
Very interesting points there. How do you think we got to where we're at now?
That's such a big question. We have a trauma, I think, Latinos, of being colonized and being discriminated against. And we are being seen as outsiders in our own land. California was part of Mexico. And for us to be deemed a minority, how ironic is that? For us to be deemed a minority in basically our own country. So I think that there's been a lot of trauma among Latinos because of those conditions. And so, but things are changing. Things are not as blatantly racist as they were before. And I think that we have had some successes. And the future of California, the future of this country is Latino. And so the success of Latinos is the success of California and it's the success of this country. So it's in everybody's interest to have Latinos succeed and do better. And it's also, we're a really fun culture. We've got great music. We got great food. And so people should really join us in these efforts.
Yeah. Just a couple days ago, Jose and I went to a Latino poetry night, and Jose and I have been born and raised here in Modesto, and we were both shocked to know that something like that existed. We couldn't believe that was here in Modesto. So we left that place super inspired and just even more proud of our culture. So yeah, it's here. And yeah, Latino success is California success. So I do love that statement. Do you have any other questions?
You remind me of my aunt. She used to be an attorney. And before this, I was thinking about bringing her on the podcast. And some of the things you said really reflected what she said, especially the racism and growing up here in Riverbank as a Latina, and most of the family didn't speak English and they would get ridiculed. And she holds a lot of those moments in her life as fuel.
I love that it's fuel for the fire, all those things. Yeah. And I think that young people now, there's a lot of people that are, I think the younger generation, also the younger people that I encounter, they're also really good about being very frank about their mental state and asking for what they need and acknowledging when they're depressed or stressed out. And I think when we were growing up, we kept all that inside. That was always a sign of weakness. And now it's really encouraging to see people sharing that and knowing that they're not alone feeling that way. Because I think unless you share that, it's going to be hard to get past that. And together, knowing other people feel the same way, that you're not alone, it's really important. Because I think the most important thing about life is those relationships with friends and family. Because without that, it's really hard to move forward in life. So keep your friends and family close. Be curious about what's going on. And yeah.
I do think that in the Latino community, it's very beautiful to think. I go around life always thinking, oh, that person reminds me of my uncle, of my aunt, for the little qualities, but very important qualities. So I think that having such a close-knit community really is, it comes alive when those qualities come around. And our whole community has it. There's been many qualities. I've enjoyed working the citizenship classes with Maria and seeing the community that comes in. It's super inspiring to see people. We always like to start the class saying, what did you do today? Tell us your name, where are you from, and things like that. And sometimes I hear people like, oh yeah, I woke up at 3 a.m. And I'm like, man, I'm over here waking up at 7:30, like all this. So it's very inspiring. It reminds me of my family. It reminds me of my family's family. And it's something that should never be lost. And now more than ever, we're getting together as a community. Right before this Maria was saying that she came on because I asked her to. So that's a great example to me and a great inspiration to know that there's things that we can do getting together as a community, coming together as Latinos and just people in general, just being human, having heart. It really shows at the end of the day when you're genuine and very heartful with your decisions. And I feel like that's how I've tried to lead my life. And that's what makes me, in the definition, a leader. I feel that sense of leadership because I have my whole community behind me too. Not behind me, with me. Thank you so much, Maria, for coming on. I'm extremely grateful for you coming on. It's been an honor. We've been talking about this episode. This was the pinnacle of our podcast. Everyone, shout out Estela and Ander. They're not here today, Enrico, but they all wanted to hear you on the mic. For those of you that are listening to us for the first time, we had today Maria Arevelo, a great friend of mine, citizenship instructor, Latino Leadership Initiative leadership team. She says she's not on the leadership team now, but she's still involved, and just a great person overall. One of the biggest influences of my current life right now. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
As always, Familia, we'll leave you with a quote. Today, we have a very special one, I like to say, because I wrote it. Just recently, the Latino Leadership Initiative social medias reached out to me and asked me to just share a little bit about what the LLI meant to me and what it did. And like I mentioned earlier, LLI really made me be even more proud of who I am and why I am the way I am, and embrace my people even more. So with that, I like to say that LLI reminded me that leadership is the strongest when it reflects the voices, stories, and culture of the community it serves. Our identity is not something to set aside in professional spaces. It is our biggest strength and asset. And through representation, we create the pathways for others to feel seen, empowered, and inspired. As always, thank you, Familia, for listening. See you on the next one.